So the question that most people start with is, can AI run this? And I find the problem is, if you ask an engineer, can AI run this? The answer 99%, 99 out of 100 times, the answer is yes. And I think that's really asking the wrong question. I think the question really should be, should AI run this? Okay, so the premise for today is to give you a little bit of an AI reality check. And in terms of homework, I think it'd be really useful as we go through this framework, and I'll run through it, obviously. If you have one idea that you're thinking about in terms of a workflow, and at the end of it, when we run through this framework, come up with an honest decision, whether or not to build it, whether or not you need to work on it and repair it, or no, it's not a good fit, we're not going to do it. So, pick something that is either slowing revenue down or chewing up your day-to-day, it's taking too much time, whatever it is that you think is a good candidate for this workflow, and we'll run it across this rubric and we'll see how it is. Okay, let's begin. Okay, so the current state with a lot of companies that I speak to, this is about where they're at. Some people have got a ChatGPT license, some people have got a Claude license, some of them are using Copilot, God help them. But the reality is, there's not much consistency across the work. There's no real consistent approach to what they should be running. Sometimes, one of the vendors may have come in and given a workshop. I heard this recently from a client, or at least a potential client. I won't name the provider, but it rhymes with Google. And this founder said to me, Google has come in and, mate, it's great. We can do anything with Bem and I. We don't need any help. We'll figure it out. Okay, I'll come back in 6 months and see how much this has actually changed. Or you may have had, a promising pilot. Somebody's come in, they've showed you what's there, and it looks great. But as soon as they leave the room, then nothing happens. All right. So what's the promised land here? What could this be looking like? So the better future, I think, is not necessarily more AI, or that's not the only thing. You want to look at the reason why. It's a business that is running more effectively, more efficiently. You've got a workflow that starts, on Monday, that has a clear owner. You've got a measurable output. You've got a result that you can have a look at, and it's used in your real day-to-day work. I find that a lot of people who dabble with AI without putting it to work with an actual useful, hey, this is good for my business, they come away the impression that, AI is a little bit of a toy and it's not good for anything. So if you apply it to something that is a genuine workflow, something that really helps your business, that's when I find you get that aha moment. You get that, wow, this is amazing. And, everybody comes to that moment in a different timeline. So let's see if we can dig into that a little bit. Okay, so the question that most people start with is, can AI run this? These are, can the model perform this task? Can it reach the systems and the data that you have sitting underneath? These are engineering questions. And I find the problem is, if you ask an engineer, can AI run this? The answer 99%, 99 out of 100 times, the answer is yes. And I think that's really asking the wrong question. I think the question really should be, should AI run this? And this is something that we feel very, very deeply at Works, to the point where, instead of forward deployed engineers, which is the current kind of hot title right now, where you embed an engineer into the client's company and figure out, what AI workflows to build on, we actually use forward deployed operators. And an operator in this instance is somebody who's run a business, or somebody who has owned a function in a business, or marketing or sales or RevOps or whatever that is. And so they're applying that commercial lens over the top, not just can you run this, but is it valuable? Where's the human in the loop that needs to remain here? What needs to be fixed first? And so in order to answer this question, this is kind of what we're going to be working through today. The reality check, I've got a rubric with five points that we're going to run through. This is what this is what you should be thinking about when you've got that that workflow in mind. This is not a universal build list. This is not a maturity score or anything like this. It's really a decision lens for you to figure out, should you build this workflow and does it make sense? And I will throw a caveat out here that, the skills, if you follow me on LinkedIn, you may have seen an article that I wrote recently that's the skills are the last thing that you build. And really the thought behind that is you got to get the foundations right first. You've got to put your architecture in place. You've got to get your tooling in place. You've got to connect it up to everything, all your data sources, whatever it needs to do to run. So, assuming that you have that all in place, even before you start running through, let's have a look at, these are the 5 things to look at that will determine whether or not a workflow, and I'm using the word workflow here fairly interchangeably. I know there's a bunch of people on the call here who could probably give a better definition than me. But, a workflow, an agent, a skill, I'm going to use those relatively interchangeably at this point. They can all be graded on this rubric to see whether or not we're doing the right thing by putting it into play. Okay, so this is the first trap to think about when you're assessing a kind of a workflow, and this is the XKCD classic comic talking about automation. And I very much live in the top here. And yes, I want to call out that this workshop is very much a do as I say, not as I do. And I'm calling that out now because there's a lot of people on this call who know that I am yet to come across the 30-second task that I won't spend 12 hours automating. The reality is we all think it's going to be very easy. It's going to take five minutes to automate this task and I'll never have to do it again. But the reality is 10 hours later, you're still debugging or you're thinking about version 37 and what else you can add on to it. So you got to be honest here. And especially since even more so than, straight automation or old automation, AI is probabilistic. So you got to be really careful that, the outcome that it's generating is consistent and then it fits. So this is, again, comes from an automation point of view, but it's a really nice way to think about, the budget that you have when you're building your AI workflow. The 2 axes that you've got here are how often do you run the task across the Y, and how much time is shaved off each time that you run it. And this is looking at if you ran this workflow for 5 years. All right, this is me being optimistic. Yeah, totally. This workflow is going to run forever, man. It's going to be amazing. It's going to run for 5 years with 0 debug. No, the reality is, the rule here is, how long will it take to build? How much time do you need to spend debugging it? And how often are you going to have to run maintenance to keep it flowing? So, if it's saving you 30 seconds a run and you only run it once a year, it's going to save you 2 minutes in 5 years. Man, I don't think, even for me, that's going to cross that rubric of, yeah, that's generating enough value for you to kind of push it through. And so this is obviously just a rule of thumb, but you can use this to guide your decision in terms of, is the ROI there? Is it going to make sense for me to build this, or should I just man up and actually do the work old school by myself? So, one missing condition across here, your value, your feasibility, your adoption, your source of truth, your permissions. Only one of these here can be enough to kind of throw out. Sorry, I missed a couple there. No, that just checking. One of these can be enough to throw out, the decision that it can be good enough to put this in place. And, when you give a demo, and 100%, I've done this before, when somebody gives you a demo, you usually tightly control it. They're standing, the person is standing right there. They know what input to have, they know what the outcome are going to be. They can hide the exceptions. In this instance, it could be the source of truth. Are there conflicting documents driving your agent? Is the CRM data messy? I'll give you a tip. It's always messy. We all know that. That's the reality of what we're working on here. So if that's not right, then maybe you need to go in and repair that foundation to go enough. But once all 5 of these are good enough, then the workflow earns its way. It earns the right to run. And I say earns the right here because it doesn't mean that it has to be perfect. Like, you don't have to get 100% score across all of these. It's really that, it is valuable enough. It's really that you can trust it enough that it makes sense to run that it clears that ROI bar. When the uncertainty increases, then maybe you think about narrowing the permissions about what it does. And I think, the reality is, whenever we're setting up these workflows, you should always be monitoring them at the start. Run them as small and as tightly scoped as possible to begin with. Check the inputs, check the outputs before they go out if you can, before you kind of pull the trigger and give it a little bit more autonomy. And again, the goal here isn't to give AI the maximum autonomy. It's the smallest useful action that AI can take safely. So if the workflow earns its way by being valuable enough, it's delivering value, someone's going to own that. If you've got somebody who's built this for you, if they're not in the room, who's going to own it? And it's safe to run. Is it not spewing out your financial information? It's not sharing your bank account details. It's not spamming the world. Then it earns the right to act. All right. So let me show you an example here of a workflow that ran and told me to do nothing. And I consider that to be a success. This is AI showing constraint. And I'll show you what this looks like. So this one I call the LinkedIn honeypot. So I post quite a lot on LinkedIn. That's sadly the biggest social network that I have. I'm okay with that. I made my peace with that. But I built a workflow here that scans all of the people who engage with my content for the week and then runs them through a kind of a series of stages of analysis, stage gating them. So to see if they're ICP and to see if I should follow up with them and shoot them a DM. So the first thing that it does is it will ping ADIO, which is my CRM, and it will check. I've got a list in there. It's got all the people that I know. There's a lot of us who are on LinkedIn every day. We tend to comment on each other's posts a lot, so I want to exclude them. I run a community on the side, and so there's another check to see if they're fractional folks. It might be better off down that path. And then in this instance, which was from last week, the remaining 56, they didn't pass the ICP test. And so this workflow ran, and there were actually 0 people that I should follow up with directly. And that was absolutely, I consider that run a success. Now, it doesn't mean that my content was successful, because if it's not returning any ICP, then maybe I need to think about that. But in terms of this workflow, I consider that a successful run. And so let's dig into using the criteria that I pulled up before. We'll dig into why this workflow, earned its right to run. So value, currently, my LinkedIn's fairly noisy, so I don't go through and check everyone who likes, or most people who comments, I'll check. But if somebody adds a reaction, I don't go and check to see if I know them, if we're connected, if we're ICP. But there's obviously clear value in that. The reason I write content, the reason we all write content on LinkedIn generally, is to try and engage with our target audience. And so, there's clearly value in this one. Feasibility, can we do it? Yes, 100%. We can. Technically, this is possible. This is the engineering question. So I run Appify. It scans all of those comments. It kind of enriches the company to score. So I've got the data that I can run against my ICP. I have an ICP document, that's constantly updated. And then I have a small agent with Claude SDK that just runs a review and says whether or not they're ICP. The adoption piece here, it's owned by me, obviously, and I'm going to be the one who runs it. And importantly, it's not so big that I won't run it. If this came back with, even if it was 100, if I had to review 100 profiles every week on LinkedIn and then decide whether or not I'm going to message them and then send an outbound, I probably wouldn't do it. That's too much. But because I can, and I'll show you what it looks like in a minute, because I can jump in here and it gives it to me in a neatly packaged way, there's usually kind of 15 to 20 people that I need to review. That's workable, so I'll do that. In terms of source of truth, it's coming directly from LinkedIn, so it ticks that box. So the data is clean. We know that it's accurate using Appify. My relationship history, that the known people that I have in my network in ADIO, that's obviously evolving and kind of will continue to expand, but that's pretty accurate. You could make the argument that the Works ICP is probably the weakest in terms of this source of truth piece because, we're relatively new. We're relatively new in this space, and I'm still figuring out who actually is the ICP. And in terms of the last one here, permissions, what the workflow is allowed to do in this space is it can research, it can run that ICP analysis, so it can classify them, and it can draft those messages, but it cannot send those kind of messages. So let me share. I'll just show you what that looks like. So this is when this runs, this is what this will come up with. So Jamie is a guy that I know, so I can just come in here and click known. There's a bunch of other people, probably Saskia I know here, so I can just go across, see if there's some. Alex, let's do Alex. Most of you on here, or some of you on here may know Alex. He's a mate from around this part. So if I click on him, I can see his LinkedIn profile. I could copy that DM, just jump into LinkedIn. His profile's open in a new tab and send it, and then away we go. This is relatively, what's the polite word to describe? This is relatively manual. This is just a download now in this workflow, copy these decisions in it, then we'll update in a way things go there. So that's what my workflow looks like, and that's how it earns the right to run. And again, coming back to the fact that it came back with 0 actions for me to take, I think that's a success because that's showing refinement at scale, applying taste at scale. Okay, so when you're thinking about these workflows and whether or not to put them, whether or not it's something inside your company or it's something that you're doing for your clients, whether you're building it yet, I think just because you decide no or not yet doesn't mean that it's been a waste of time or the workflow doesn't have value. I think, a no is a very good outcome because it means you can put that out of your head. Maybe the ROI isn't there, the time that it saves. It's just much more effective and efficient if you do this the old school manual way. 100% that's a good outcome. If there's something in your assessment that means, perhaps the data source is a little bit flaky, it's a little bit unreliable, or there's no ownership, or the process itself that you're trying to build isn't clear, then you go and work on that foundation and you get that right. And then it maybe switches to a yes. So maybe it's just not right now. And then obviously, if the value is clear and you're ticking all 5 of those boxes, then go for it. That's a good outcome. I think, again, coming back to that core premise of it's not whether or not you build it, it's if you should build it. AI maturity should be measured not by how many workflows you automate, it's how consistently you make the right call in this sense. Build it, repair it, or leave it alone. Now, as I said, this is very much a do as I say, not as I do, because this is a map of all of the skills and workflows that I have. And yes, this is a sprawling beast. There's about 85 skills, bots, custom agents and things that I've built here. I'll share I do have this as a link, so I'll share this with everybody after the call as well, if you want to go digging through here. Now, in my defense, for this vast library of things, this is my day job. And so I spend a lot of time doing things that are not necessarily business driven. The fact that I'm doing the research and testing out tools and playing with things, A, it's part of the learning experience. And I think, everybody on here, if you're playing with AI, that that's the only way to figure out things. And then B, this is what I'm selling on a day-to-day basis. So there's a lot of experimentation that I've done in here. That doesn't mean that I'm using all of these kind of day-to-day either as well. So I did a little bit of heat mapping just to see how many of these actually get used. And 20 of them make the cut out of those 84 on a kind of a regular or semi-regular basis. There's some automated ones here at the top that run kind of autonomously. And then you can see there's about 10 here that I work with on a daily or a couple of times a week. So it's a relatively small subset of those. They're the ones that you want to identify. They're the ones that move the needle. They're the ones that you should focus on first. And I know it's not the focus of this workshop, but I want to call out just two in here that I think are very useful and probably my favorite skills to run at the moment: cross review and red team. So I often get asked, what model should we be running with? I think the answer is it depends. And actually, I feel like I'm in a little bit of a polyamorous relationship with Codex and Claude. I run both daily. I have both running at all times. And where I'm finding to get a lot of value at the moment is this cross review in red team, where I use the output. I use one model to check the other model's work. So if I want a one-time check, I'll run cross review and I'll send it to the other model to give some feedback. And red team is a adversarial run where each model will have 5 rounds unless they come to agreement before that. So those two are probably two of my favorites at the moment. Shout out or raise your hand if you've got any questions at this point. Otherwise, I'll just keep powering through. I think we're running well on time, which is nice. Okay, so if you're curious about, if you're not sure about where to get started, as I said, I will share this monster of a list. You can check it out. You can search through those, because I do often get the question, what should I be building? What workflows are useful to me? This is a list that was put out by Claire Vaux. If you haven't come across Claire Vaux, she's very active on Twitter. Yes, I'm old. I call it Twitter. She's very active there, drops a lot of knowledge around AI. She's built a AI-powered product for building products, PRD, Chat PRD, I think it's called. But she also has is a host of a podcast called How I AI, which is very practical, very actionable. 100% go and check that out. She partnered up with Lenny, the product guru, to do that. So she's got a lot of alpha coming from there. But these are some ideas. She does a lot of work training business executives. So if you're thinking about this from a business workflow perspective, these are some of the things that you can get started with, get you up and rolling until you have a flavor for it. Okay, so in terms of if anyone has a workflow they want to throw in the chat or come off mute and they're happy to talk about, this is the real reality check when you're thinking about that to see if it's going to go live. What's the workflow? Does it have a starting point? Does it have an end point? If it does happen, who's going to own it? Who's going to check it? What are the consequences if it's wrong? What happens if it breaks, if it goes wrong? What information does it need? What data sources does it have access to? And what happens when one of those breaks? Who owns it now? And if we put this workflow in place, who would own it in the new reality? And so then of the 5 kind of checks that we ran through, which one is the least certain? Which one's got the most uncertainty around it? Can you repair it? What's the final outcome? Do you build it? Do you repair it? Or you say, reluctantly, no thanks, I'm not going to build this one. I have done that occasionally. Occasionally I let a workflow go, but it's never easy when you enjoy working on the tools. So this is really, this is the heart of what we do at Works, and this is what we do at businesses at scale. Our process is we will embed inside the company, we'll map out their workflows from start to finish across the teams, and run those 5 operating conditions into a standalone audit document using that framework, and give it a 90-day plan. So if you need this in your business, come holler at me. Very happy to see if we can help you out. All right, so this is the final, I guess, the end state. AI can work in just about any workflow or any part of your business now. The frontier models are that good. But I think the take-home message that I'm trying to drill home here is that doesn't mean that it should. The goal shouldn't be just more AI. It's not about driving AI adoption for AI's sake. It's about a business that works differently. It's about a better outcome, sorry. It's, whatever it is that you're trying to drive, that's what you should be working towards. And, AI is just a way to achieve that. It's not the end state itself. Okay, thanks, folks. That is the end of my presentation today. Does anyone have any questions, or even better, does anyone have a workflow that they had in mind, would like to throw up and kick it around with a group while we've got a few minutes? Anyone feeling brave today?
I don't have a workflow, but I was just curious on how you work with multiple partners and collaborators to establish the base workflow sort of parameter. So we do event delivery. So we've got to work with a lot of different stakeholders and figuring out how we scale that model over time is the most difficult part so far.
Yeah, that's really hard, mate. So specifically, you're talking about different systems, different data points. How do you get access to all of those and let your magic run?
Yeah.
Super hard with that one, mate. I haven't come across that specific example. It's not one that we have to deal with on a day to day, but we have kind of done it on a smaller version where we've got our internal systems, and then we've got we will work inside the clients, basically inside their architecture. That's kind of the whole pitch. And so I spent a bit of time thinking about how do we port what is here over to kind of the client and what that looks like, which is, I think it's a much easier ask than what you're talking about, because we're only pushing. And if they need to connect any systems, it's all their systems. Can you share a little bit about what sort of systems you need to tap into? Is that the real challenge?
It's really, so we have delivery frameworks for some events in November. We go planning to readiness, or planning to signals to readiness to the command, basically when the events are going on, the post and then renewal of that event. And
Yep.
those events are scalable beyond November
Yep.
around the globe. So we're working with government, we're working with private partners, we're working with sponsorship technology from the US, we're working with supply systems from Singapore, we're working with event delivery teams in Dubai, a lot of things. So it's how do we build the base model that we can start to automate in a way so that as we scale our events, it sort of pre-designs the planning environment so that we can scale it to other locations.
Interesting. And so how do you do it currently?
Presentations.
Presentations,
spreadsheets,
emails.
Staying awake till 3 a.m. doing Excel Gantt charts and presentations and diagrams and everything, just to make sure that everyone aligns. And I've looked at Odoo and things like that, but it's just then everyone's just following a piece of information rather than it helping to guide the process. And as we scale, we need to guide the process.
Yeah. I think in a situation like that, if that was me trying to figure that out, I would, and this is how I kind of got started when I first started going down the AI rabbit hole. It was building internal processes before I even thought about doing anything for a client. And when we're working with clients, particularly as we go through the audit process and trying to get them thinking about it, one useful kind of framework that I found is to think of it like a factory. And so you've got inputs and you've got outputs. So if a client sends you, I don't know what it might look like, but a client might send you, hey, send me a proposal. Great. You've got an email, or it's a transcript from a call. If you jump on a sales call, they're your inputs. You run it across a template, because I'm sure that every proposal you have is totally unique and a beautiful snowflake, but you've got a template, right? It's probably in PowerPoint or whatever you're using. And so I would look at that piece and say, right, can I automate that little piece of it? And right, there's one input, there's one output. And if there's multiple outputs, even better, because that's what AI is really, really good at. It can take those inputs and create, here's a deck, here's the intro email, here's a one-pager for the board, and here's a social post that you can use to talk about. I don't know, I just made up those outputs. So I would try and carve off little pieces like that. And I think in this game, it's all about incremental kind of game development. If you can get 1% better every day, that really compounds. And I think the compounding effect in AI is where the real magic comes from. And that can either be improving what the skill does or expanding what it does, which is probably going to be what I would recommend in your case. So the first one is proposal, then it's proposal and follow-up if they haven't responded. Then it's proposal and follow-up, and maybe you have an internal structure that says if they come back and say yes, okay, great, then I need to create a contract and then an extended plan. and an upsell, and either assign it to somebody in the team. And then you start picking off some of those actions as well. And yeah, you'll test it, run it manually or semi-manually every time. And then when you feel comfortable it can run by itself, then I think that would be a good way to go about it. Yeah, absolutely. Peter, talk about the model you use.
I just turned the microphone. So, Zach, you're doing consulting and all that. What we're actually is building brains for actually the fitness industry.
Nice.
So, Jason, it's like you talking about in the fitness industry, there's multiple different products that run different parts of the business, and their APIs are absolutely crap. Like I got one I'm connected to the moment. We're pulling data. I can only pull one record per second. And I have 8,500 classes to pull out of the system. So it takes a couple of hours. So your AI agents can't work with that at all. And they have a spat attack, as you know, Zach. Or the APIs give you inconsistent data. So what we've written is in our model. We actually pull the data from all different systems like Stripe, MBO, which is one of the booking systems, or Gym Master, ClassPass, if you go type of thing, also from Xero, their emails. We pull it into one database in Xero, and we then build a model around it which links every piece of data with every other piece of data from the different systems. So if you've got a Stripe payment, you can link it to the person buying it in the booking system, and you can link it to the invoice that was created somewhere else. And Databricks call this ontology mapping. So when you pull that into a database, like we use Neon, which is a high-speed progress database, we can now search across that data in under a second. So one of the clients we're doing, they've got 1.5 million records in their database. They come from their different systems. They run 7 gyms with 12,000 members. He can now query that data from his mobile phone anytime and get an answer within 5 to 10 seconds. And then we've built skills to allow them to do other analysis on that information. He's using that to calculate right now as what bonuses he should pay his teachers based on retention and class and average class attendance, well, medium class attendance, not on the capacity of the room, but what that time slot on that day and historically normal gets in it. And he's using that to build a model of how he's going to calculate paying his teachers a bonus based on performance and retention. Could never been done before. We've also solved for them as one of the most frustrating things they used to have in their business, which is what you talked about, Zach, is we run a process every 10 minutes. It looks at their booking system at any classes that are in the next 3 hours. If they have below 4 people in the class, it sends a notification to decide whether they actually cancel the class or not. They used to have somebody looking at the computer screen every 15 minutes, every day, just looking at that to make a decision. So, Zach, that's a perfect example of a painful process being fixed.
Mate, I think it's also a perfect example of get your foundations right. Like
Yep.
what you just described there, until you've got that data that it can be pulled in a useful, reliable, quick enough way, then don't even bother with any of these workflows, So you've done a great job there of kind of building up that foundation.
Yeah, and that's the fundamental. We have one, which was the simple thing of pausing people's memberships. AI connected to our chat, so we know the identity. It used to be cost one staff member maybe 15 hours a month, but it was a thankless task. And when they made a mistake, the customer screamed at them because it was money coming out of their bank account. The AI chat monitors every chat, and if they've got a pause request or an adjustment to their pause, the chat manages it automatically and applies it based on what the thing and what people can write as like, I'm going away for 2 weeks from next week. The AI can work it out. Or I want to take 2 weeks off from the start of school holidays. The AI is capable of working it out type thing. We wrote that back 18 months ago, where it took us a month to write it with AI. Now, if I rewrite it, I reckon it'll take me about a day. And at Christmas time, we did 600 pauses in a month for the businesses we had, for our own studio business we own. And we never thought of that task being fixed until somebody put their hand up and says, I'm so sick of being abused by customers for missing their pause request.
And mate, so what has changed in that it's quicker for you to write now? What changed in that?
Back then I was writing with maybe ChatGPT 4.
So model difference?
The model difference, I now use Claude and OpenAI 5.6 and Claude Fable and Sonnet to write my stuff. I'm currently in the last 4 days written a full product-led growth, sales-led growth management CRM system in the last 4 days, connected to Facebook, connected to LinkedIn, connected our systems with all the notifications of what's happening as they go through the product, generating automatic messaging. Where when I did that back in 2022 for an online yoga platform we built, that was a 2-month exercise.
Amazing.
So, and
I think, sorry, Pete, just to unpack something else there that you dropped in that I think it's worth pulling on that thread a little bit. You know, you mentioned that this is a task that previously we didn't think it was worth solving. You know, I think that's another perfect example of if you're examining you're going through the whole rubric of, is this workflow worth doing? You know, AI has unlocked, I think, this whole new category of activity like that, where if that was a person doing it, no way. Like it's just not worth doing it. But because these machines can operate at scale, at velocity, with intelligence, with taste, you know, it unlocks some of these new actions that previously weren't even on the table.
yeah, example, that commission model or that 3-hour notice before, and we used AI to build that. Before AI, you would never have done it. You would have just kept up paying people to do it. Because to go and hire an engineer and get them one to do it was a $30,000 exercise. Now it was done in like 4 hours to build it, and it's a deterministic product. So it's not probability like AI is, but the AI built the workflow to run it for us, for that client. That's the change, and I see it with my partner using a non-software engineer. He's learned how to use Claude Code.
Love it.
And if you see what he builds now is amazing. And what he's pushing it every week, every day he talks to the AI, can you improve this or do this? And the AI will work it out.
Yeah.
At times it screws up, but he's been able to build a full yield management, as he calls it, for new members, tracking their journey from the day they 10 for the first 60 days. What they're doing, how they're performing, what communication, what classes, and when they're starting to fall off, and how to track them. And he used the AI also to analyze history, and he found he had a configuration error in his past configurations, which was costing him $35,000 per annum.
Nice.
I found the problem, told him how to fix it in 2 minutes. $35,000 found.
Right, that's the kind of value we love to see unlocked. Hamish, question from you, mate, around judgment. Yeah, 100%. You gotta, particularly anything that's externally focused, has got to be human in the loop. You know, I have very few completely autonomous workflows that run without input on it. Now, obviously, it's very dependent on the type of work that you do, but the reality is you should be judging. You know, it is a lot of work. You gotta check the data that goes into it. You got to check the inputs. You got to check the outputs. You know, you got to refine it. You got to compound on that. And so, you know, with regards to copy, I think what's worked really well for me is throwing at it as many examples as you can. And I use a process which I didn't know it at the time. I just kind of was bumbling along, but it's called meta prompting, where you have it build the outcome and then you refine it. So, okay, draft me this LinkedIn post. And I can remember I did a check and I wrote a LinkedIn article. So it's got to be good, but we're not talking about life-changing here. And it took me 63 edits to get it to the point where I wanted to post it. But if I was to run that now, I would say maybe 3 or 4. And the reason, I would say the three biggest reasons that has happened. One, the models are getting a lot better, and I like ChatGPT Soul for writing at the moment. Fable's basically unusable. 2, having that foundation with guardrails, examples, templates, telling it what not to do. And then 3, probably the big one is I use a skill called review that runs after every session, where it has a look at the feedback that I've given it. And if we're talking about, again, using your example, hey, don't use this word. That's an AI tell. I would never say that. Make it more casual. Put a swear word in it. All the things that I would normally say to it. It will capture those and then add it to your content skill. And then maybe, the assumption here is that you are using a skill rather than starting fresh every time. So if I was to answer that more clearly, now I've thought about it. 1, build a skill. And to build a skill, you've got a bunch of examples, some rules, some templates. 2, you have a system that compounds and learns, so that grows over time. And then 3, depending on the type of work that you're doing, different models have different strengths. And a lot of the times it'll come down to taste. Like, some people prefer how different models operate or write particularly.
Nice, Zach, thanks. So skill, system that compounds, and then some kind of review.
Yeah, totally. So every time you kind of, you're spending that time judging it, rather than going in and there is definitely a time sink at the start. So rather than going in and changing the document directly, and even if, you could tell the AI, hey, this is wrong, do that. Or if you're much more comfortable jumping into the Google Doc or PowerPoint or whatever it is that you're doing, change it, then feed it back in and say, hey, I made some edits. Go and have a look at the changes, figure out what I did, and then bake that into the skill.
Yeah, nice. Thanks. Although I am finding that my edits often make it worse, and then they come back. And that just doubles the load again.
Yeah,
nice one,
totally.
Zach. Thank you.
Great session, man. Thank you. Just your comment around internal workflows and business flows. I guess when I say internally, I mean, it's mostly what I'm finding is in my role as product lead is that, I don't really, I guess I don't even think of them as workflows, but I think about it's the interface with other team members. So one thing that comes to mind is capturing sort of customer insight and feedback into a more structured stream so that when it hits product, it's already kind of got quite a bit of rich detail in it. And it's been somewhat thought about it as a rubric it goes through. So that's something that I did internally, but I guess I never thought about it as saving time. It was more like opening the surface to how, from all the various angles we could collect feedback, and then improving the quality of that feedback.
Yeah, but it's giving value, right? Like that's,
Absolutely.
I would imagine that's enormously valuable. Because previously, how was it being done at all?
Previously, what it would look like is, classic, you're in a, weekly chat or something, and someone would make a comment like, oh, we should do this thing, right? Or probably more on a day-to-day, sporadically ad hoc would be a Slack thread drop that would just come in and say, hey, I think we should, fix this thing or do this thing better. Or I spoke to this customer and
a client, customer said this.
Yeah. And so that was okay as a starting point, but because it was asynchronous and because there was no kind of immediate method to collect more rich insight from that, what would happen is that that message would land, 20 minutes, whatever would go by, someone from product team would follow up and say, oh, hey, can you tell us more about such and such? And then maybe you got a response 6 hours later, but it was already, you've lost the fidelity because you've kind of, like how text chat messages reduce things down. Whereas now, arguably, each kind of thought or insight or feedback that the business team might have, it takes them longer to kind of, because they sit with it for a few minutes, chatting with a project, kind of an AI agent that I built that essentially shapes it up. But when it lands in the Slack or whatever way we do it, it's just way richer. Like you've got, a summary at the top, why it matters, an argument as to why it might be a priority or isn't. it actually does. And this actually, I should have said, it does actually save a lot of time in two ways. One is it looks at collisions and connections. So it'll dedupe, it'll look up and say, has this been posted on Slack before? Something like it. And does it exist in our product management planning software? And we'll say, do you want to enrich something that's already there, or are you actually adding a whole new thing? And what would you like to do with this? So it kind of, it's limiting us duplicating things and near misses, if you will. So that saves a lot of time,
Nice.
that part, the deduping part.
And so, mate, just tell us quickly, what does the workflow look like now? Like, how is that now being harvested and put into Slack or dashboard or whatever that looks like?
And that's also why I'm sort of, I guess, embarrassed to call it a proper workflow, because it's really, the whole team use Claude Desktop. Yep. So it's a team project where when they go, I've got a product thing, they click on that and they just go, I've got a product thing, and they give it a quick, whatever they would say. And it just takes over and it does, it's probably got, I think, 6 kind of markdown artifacts behind that that enrich what it knows and how it interacts with Git and how it interacts with Slack. But that's all the intelligence layer in it. And and then the finished product is they'll finish and go, yep, no, that's exactly what I'm saying. You've shaped it into a thing that makes sense to me, and it's written like a proper, scope requirements thing. It'll go, are you ready? Can I post it now to Slack? And if the person goes, yep, and it goes, yep, posted. And then we get it and we can take it into the product planning, add the right, labels, priority, whatever, add a bit of judgment, and then it gets into our backlog weekly sort of process.
Nice. And have you built a dashboard for it yet?
No, that's a good question.
I would, mate. My favorite thing at the moment is just to throw it at Claude and said, hey, can you build a dashboard for this? There has never been a better time in human history to be a dashboard enjoyer.
Yeah.
And even like Claude artifacts now are shareable amongst the team. So, you could make it interactive or just show growth or trends over time or whatever it is that's interesting. But yeah, man, I would just throw a one-liner at it and see what it comes up with.
So you're thinking like you could say, build me a dashboard for the use of this project in Claude Desktop.
Do that, or for this project, build me a dashboard to show what's happening, and whatever it's looking at, customer feedback on this bit, the number of kind of inputs, number of queries, number of tickets resolved, whatever it is that you're tracking in there, then it should be able to give you some insights. Or not?
Yeah, no, that's good. Okay,
mate, I'm in the hub tomorrow, mate. I'll come and find you and see what it says.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, team. We 1 minute left. Please come and find me on LinkedIn or Twitter or at the Brisbane Digital Hub or anywhere that you need to find me if you think I can help out. Enjoy the rest of your day, and if there's any questions that you have, by all means, hit me up. And anyone who registered and joined, I will send a follow-up email with a copy of the recording and a couple of those links that I mentioned.
Thank you, Zach.
Thanks, team.
Good one.
Bye. Jace, come and find me in 2 minutes. Thanks, man.
Thank you.